Right. Well, welcome to the Indy.NET Consortium. Special thanks to our sponsors, Theoris. Tim's on here. Hey, Tim. 1150 Academy, Ozcode, and Launch Fishers. We meet the first Wednesday of every month, unless there's a holiday. And we've just got a lot of great presentations lined up. If you take a look at the meetup site, you'll see what those are. I think next month is Maui. That'll be really cool. And then Azure Media Services, and then our quarterly lightning talks. I'm guessing that will be when we'll be able to meet again at Launch Fishers. I don't know yet. So when it comes to are we going to remain virtual or not, we're not 100% sure. It's possible that for all the presentations we'll stay virtual, and then for the lightning talks we'll be in person, just because that's the nature of lightning talks. But I don't see why we couldn't do lightning talks online. Just it'd be curious, how are we going to do the sign up process? But I imagine we could use a form of some sort and everyone could just write on it. So anyway, tonight we've got a phenomenal presenter, a coworker of mine, Nick George, so over at Valorem Reply. I've got my small business, I Reuse Ideas, but then my full-time gig is Valorem. So Nick's going to be talking about Blazor tonight. I think I just said Blazor, like that's how you're supposed to say it, but no, it's Blazor. But correct me if I'm wrong there, Nick. And that's the next big thing. Very cool tech. Very excited about this. Other cool thing that's going on is we're now part of the .NET Foundation. So this is a Microsoft initiative, kind of like, remember the user groups of old, where it was always spanned across, but there were user group associations. Well, the .NET Foundation is the one that Microsoft runs. Started with James Montemagno and a few others. And it's very cool because what they do is they also promote all these meetups from around the nation and around the globe, and make sure that they bring .NET developers together. So that was very cool. So as part of being in that, you show their slides. So that's what I'm showing. So if you want to find out more about them, you can go to their .NET virtual user group, which then points to all the different user groups, one of which is us. A little bit about our sponsors. I did want to, so special thanks to Theoris. Normally when we meet together in person, they bring pizza, but still the pizza is here in spirit. 1150 Academy, that's a coding boot camp that I've been a part of. Ozcode, which if you've never used it, it's a phenomenal debugging tool. It does for debugging what ReSharper does for writing code, and no, I don't mean make it slow. So Ozcode, phenomenal product, and we give one license away. So we'll look through the list of attendees and just pick one at random. So make sure that as long as you've RSVP'd for the event, which if you were here you did, then we'll make sure that you're in that drawing. If you RSVP'd through the virtual meetup, please also RSVP on the regular meetup, because otherwise we won't have your name in there. And then thanks to Launch Fishers, even though we're not meeting there right now, we will in the future. They were giving us the space in the theater. So without further ado, Nick, you could start presenting at any time, and really looking forward to your chat.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Ari.
Yeah. And I will mute.
All right, sounds good. All right, I'm gonna share my screen here. And we'll get into it. All righty, so I am presenting today on .NET Blazor. It's a topic I am passionate about, and I'm very excited about it too. It's one of those up and coming technologies that I think is going to change our industry quite a bit in some really good ways. So thank you for having me here today. I hope you guys get a lot out of this talk. So a little about me. My name is Nick George. I am working as a consultant at Valorem Reply, as already said. I've been there for about 3 years. I've been programming since I was 8, and built my first website as a fan site of the RTS game StarCraft. I'm a competitive guy, so kind of started as like a little bet with another kid in 3rd grade, and the rest is history. So as far as my hobbies go, I like to get out into nature, and I try and climb at least 114er a year out in Colorado. So the overview of this session on Blazor, we're going to learn a little bit about what Blazor is and why it's going to be, or really is, one of the most important trends of 2020. You're going to learn some basics about how Blazor works and how to start your next project with it. And I will say this, we're not going to go super in depth on anything, but we are going to give an overview of all this. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask those after the session. I'd be more than happy to answer those. So the topics we're going to go over is what is Blazor and where it started, getting started with it, the different types of Blazor runtimes, demonstrations of both of those different types of runtimes, and then we're going to see what unit testing, debugging looks like with Blazor, and then finally end with any questions any of you guys might have. So what exactly is Blazor, right? It kind of sounds like razor with a B and an L on there, right? But what exactly is it? So Blazor is a technology that allows you to use the power of .NET Core and WebAssembly to write C# everywhere. It uses open web standards and to deliver your application in any browser and any operating system. And with that, of course, it's going to work in all major browsers and all major operating systems, right? Including your Android and iOS phones, which is pretty incredible to think about. It truly is write it once, run it everywhere, which, is similar to the old adage of, JavaScript everywhere, right? But with this, it's truly C#, and I think that's what makes it so much more powerful, because it's going to be more performant being using WebAssembly. So really, Blazor is just composed. It's of a web UI framework, and you probably heard of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, right? Well, in this case, it's using HTML, CSS, and C#. And then JavaScript is optional. You don't have to even write any JavaScript if you really don't want to. But instead, you write all your components in C#, and then those get translated over. So where did all this start? There's a guy, Steve Sanderson, pretty popular name. May have heard of him. But it was kind of an idea from him that he was kind of messing around back in 2015. He heard about this new technology standard coming out called WebAssembly, and that allows you to run compiled code in the browser, right? And with the goal of sites being set on better performance. And so he took that and he tried to run all different types of languages in there, from Perl to Python to C++ and even C#. But he was only able to get one variation of C to work. He couldn't even get C# to work, right? So he kind of put it on the back burner for a little while. And then he was browsing GitHub one day and came across this library from this guy named Chris Bacon. And basically it was an interop between the C# code and then compiling down into C++. And so he figured, well, this will probably work for exactly what I needed to. So he ended up spending some time on that. And in, I believe it was the fall of 2017, NDC out in Oslo, Norway, he showed, he had a presentation on C# in the browser, right? It was a crazy topic at the time, 2017, 3 years ago. And, so that's where it all started. And there is a really good episode on this, if you're interested, on YouTube from Carl Franklin of .NET Rocks. He is interviewing Steve Sanderson on an episode of Blazor Train. So there's 2 flavors of Blazor. You have the Blazor Server app, and then you have the Blazor WebAssembly app. And the reason why there's two of these is because, well, Blazor Server doesn't actually use WebAssembly. It is more compatible with older browsers, right? But it still uses .NET Core. But then it uses Signal R as the magic sauce in between each of it. And then you have the Holy Grail side, which is Blazor WebAssembly, which is what we're all striving to get, right? Which is basically a SPA, if you want to think of it like that. But it runs WebAssembly. It runs that compiled C# code behind the scenes, which means there are some trade-offs with that as well. So before I go any further, I just wanted to announce, which this is a little bit old news at this point. When I first gave this talk, it was like, a few days old. But as of build this year, Blazor went to general availability. So it's basically production ready. And the version that you would be looking for is version 3.2. All right, so how do we get started exactly with Blazor? It's really easy. It's super easy. I mean, before GA, you actually needed to install one additional thing, which was a template and a Visual Studio. But with GA, now it's literally just down to two things you probably already have installed if you're a C# developer, which is .NET Core. You need the .NET Core SDK version 3.1 or greater. And then you need Visual Studio, whether it's the IDE 2019 flavor, it has to be 2019 or later, which there is no later yet, but and then VS Code if you're a VS Code person. If you want more information about all this and all the news behind the general availability, there's a link to that from Microsoft. So let's go into the first flavor I mentioned, which is the server-side model. It's still compiles things down in a way, right? So when you're in Visual Studio or when you're in VS Code and you actually say, build this thing for me, it's going to take your Razor components and then it's going to compile it in a way where it's going to run HTML, CSS, and JavaScript on the front end. And then it's going to call a API backend. And then how it does that actual call is through Signal R. And so when the server receives an event from the front end, it's going to recompile the code on a fly based on a diff, which is where the quickness of Signal R really comes into play. And so again, there's no WebAssembly on the front end in this model. But the thing you get out of it is that, one, the startup times are faster, but then also it's available on older browsers if you need that. So how the communication model works is, like I said, it uses HTML, CSS, JavaScript hooks on the front end with Signal R to a C# backend API server. And then for any sort of DOM updates, it kind of has its little magic sauce on the front end to do all that stuff for you. So if you're not familiar with Signal R, it's a product by Microsoft. It's been open sourced. It wasn't originally. And just the one sentence, it's just a real-time communication framework, right? Like you can use it for a lot of things, but the main thing you see it out there for, right, is like chatbots or something similar to that. Super, super lightweight, uses binary messages, and it scales amazingly huge. So I won't go too much into detail on Signal R. There's plenty of stuff out there if you're interested in that on Signal R. So let's see a demo of this in action, right, of the server side. All right, so what I'm going to do here is open up Visual Studio. Got Visual Studio 2019 ready to go right here. And I'm going to create a new project. And then with this, it's been in my recent templates, but if you just search Blazor, boom, there you go, Blazor app. And click next. And we're going to call this Blazor Server. Put it in a folder. Click create. You'll get presented with a following screen here. We have these two flavors, right? You have Blazor Server app and Blazor WebAssembly app. We're going to do the server. Click create. It's going to go through this process here, and then it should load up a single project for us that we can get right into. And so once this loads and once we get into here, you'll see that it should look kind of familiar if you're familiar with other .NET project types. We have a www root folder, which is where our CSS is going to go if you want to modify anything like that, and JavaScript if you want to add in your own JavaScript. We have data, which is we have a single model in here for our weather forecasts, and then all of our pages. So with all of these startup apps, you have the 3 pages, right? You have a counter, a fetch data, and an index page. So instead of going into that, I'm just going to load this up real fast just by pressing F5 to start debug. And so this should build and load really fast because there's not too much it needs to do here. Okay, here we go. Make sure I open up the network tab here so we can see what's going on. And so here you go. We have our home, our hello world. We have our counter page, and then our fetch data page. So there's a few things I want to note here, right? We have, let me refresh this. We have our Blazor Signal R connection, which is using WebSockets. And so every time we go to a new page, it's going to send that information to our Blazor or API server on the back. And it's going to do that diff and then send it back, right? So you see it's all binary. And these messages are insanely small, 3 bytes, 27 bytes. And then same with here on the weather forecast, right? So that's Signal R, super lightweight. You also see our startup time here. If I refresh the page, oops, let me disable cast actually. So we're going to see we have about 434 kilobytes of resources, which is really light, right? Like websites today, you know, they're in the megabyte range. So for this thing to load with only 434 kilobytes is pretty good. And then if I disable or if I enable cache, you know, it's even we got down to 34 kilobytes, right? So really lightweight, and that is the server-side model. And then I will also show later on the kind of debugging and then using a Razor component as well. So let's go back to my PowerPoint presentation here. Okay, so that was the server side. So let's talk about the client side now. The client side model, or the Blazor WASM project type or runtime, is the original holy grail of Blazor, right? Like that's what you really want to be using because that's the whole point of this thing at the end of the day. And it uses, you know, it compiles everything down to WebAssembly, which is binary code that the browser can interpret, and it works on any browser because it's an open standard. And that's where the magic comes to allows you to run C# code in there. So the diagram of this is super simple. I mean, you have a browser which runs on a UI thread, which is what we're used to right now. And then within that thread, it runs Blazor. It's that simple and it's that fast. So what exactly is WebAssembly then? WebAssembly, or like I've been abbreviating it as WASM, is a binary instruction format or a stack-based virtual machine. It's kind of the technical term for it. If you want to know more info on that, you can go to the actual WebAssembly website and learn more. But it's sandbox, so it's secure. It's a safe execution, which prevents attackers from getting access to the browser itself or other tabs in the browser, or even, you know, as far up as the host operating system. All right, so back again, let's do client side now, so we can compare the differences. So I'm gonna exit this guy. And then, just like we did before, I'm gonna create a new project here. Call this Blazor WASM. And then instead of server, I'm going to click the WebAssembly app this time. So there's a few options you have as well over here. One of them is ASP.NET Core hosted. And then you also have the ability to make it a PWA, a progressive web app. For this demonstration, I'm not going to really go into PWAs, but it is available out of the box, and it is a really fantastic feature that's also going to be big trend this year. Yeah, so I'm going to actually click this, because if you don't, then you have no API backend, and it's literally all front-end code that gets compiled down. So if you have nothing that needs, if you have like a third-party API that you're using, or if you don't need any APIs yourself and can all be just run statically and offline on the front end, then you don't need to check this box. But for our demonstration today, I'm going to check it. Let it load here. Alrighty. So we have two projects this time. We have one for the client, which is where all of your Blazor pages are going to be. And then you have one for the server, which is where your controllers are. All right, so when we click that weather forecast page, it's going to call into here, and it's going to actually, do all the work here. And then you have the shared, which is where you can use models shared on the server as well as the front end. So like on the fetch data, what it's doing is it's pulling in that Blazor wasm.shared, and then it's using that as the model to output here. So real quick before we go into this demo, I'm going to kind of go over Razor pages. So Razor pages are just a format where you can use C# and HTML kind of all in the same page, right? It's pretty powerful because you can do things like this, right? You can import namespaces. You can just have HTML here, and then do logic right here within the code. It's kind of I'm going to kind of go out on a limb and say it's kind of close to React, right? React kind of proposed that thing years back, and it was like, oh no, separation of concerns. But it really is powerful. So this is what the Razor pages look like, and then you can just easily put this data in here without having to do too much upfront code, and then even have functions in here, which is great. So just like before, I'm going to start a debug session here. Let it load and build all three of those projects. All right. So you notice that little loading thing there. That's the first indicator that something's changed, right? Like it takes a little longer to load this app than the server app. And so there's also this big thing of loading these DLLs. Like, what the heck? The browser is actually loading in system.dll and system.transactions and system.net. Like, that's crazy, right? Well, that's the power of WebAssembly. And so the other big indicator is, oh, wow, now we've beefed this thing up to 6.6 megabytes. Zipped, gzipped. Unzipped, it's actually 18.4 megabytes. It's a beast. It's huge now. I will say this, the team is working on actively getting that smaller, but it's just like a spa, right? Like it's going to have that bigger upfront page load time for more performance offline, as well as you continue to use the app. So yeah, so you have all these DLLs in here, and you'll see we have the .NET runtime right here for WebAssembly, which is going to actually help us. It's just a helper file that helps us load things in. And then down here, we actually have our, where to go, Blazor wasm.pdp. Here we go. So like here you can see our actual DLL Smart projects right here. So Blazor wasm.shared. And so if I load this again, right, if I don't disable cache and just refresh the page, it loads super fast. It's down to that 500 kilobytes unzipped, which is kind of similar to the server side. So after you load it that first time, it does get really fast on cache. And then as you would expect, these pages, work like normal, but they don't go, like this one doesn't have to do a signal R connection, it just works, right? Okay. So those are the two flavors. Real quick introduction to both of those. So before I go further into other, I just want to kind of pause for a moment and say, like, why should you even use Blazor? Like, we have these great things out there like React and Angular, and you know, like if you want to go as far as to say, like, even MVC, even though that's losing market share quite fast. Well, quite plainly, I mean, it's fully featured, right? This is something that kind of the .NET Blazor team kind of put out there, and it's just like it comes packed with so many features on top of you just being able to use C# and strong runtime typing. Like, to get that out of front-end JavaScript apps, you need to have things like TypeScript, and you need to have all these checkers and stuff on the first place. And then you also don't have the first-class tooling of Visual Studio IDE on top of it, right? With all of .NET and what .NET has to offer. Plus all the powerful debugging you have. I mean, it really is amazing when you have those three things on top of it. It just blows anything else out of the water. And then, quite honestly, like progressive web apps, like I mentioned earlier, they're going to be the next thing. A lot of apps, you're not going to see them being native anymore. You're going to start seeing them be PWAs. And we've already seen this trend already with, you know, things like Twitter and Netflix. You know, they're designing PWAs instead of native apps. So that is going to be there, and that's built out of the box with Blazor. So some quick pros and cons to Blazor. Blazor Server works on older browsers. Check. It's good, right? If you still need that. It has a lower first time to load because it's really just a super lightweight front-end app that's just calling to a backend using Signal R. You can host secure resources with it, right? Because it's on that server. And if you need anything secure, it's right there, and then you just request it. Low latency, but the downside of this, of using Blazor Server, is one, you don't get WASM, and it has to be online. You have to be able to get your stuff from somewhere, some server. And then you have to think about scaling, right? Like if you're going to be getting hit pretty hard, you're going to have to think about how you scale Signal R potentially. Now with Blazor WASM, you're going to have that larger first time to load because it's basically like a SPA, right? You're going to have that 6.6 megabytes gzipped. But after that first page load, caching is going to kick in, and you should be okay. And then, like I said, every single version, they're getting that smaller and smaller, which is fantastic. There's basically no latency to the server because in most cases, there's no server, right? If you're designing this thing without a server, then it's completely available offline. And then, like I mentioned in the previous slide, you have PWA support with that offline capability built right into it. You don't have to do anything else. And then scale's done on the client side. You don't have to worry about that. Really, the only thing you have to worry about is just downloading the static resources, which you can easily do through a CDN. All right, debugging, that first-class debugging support that I was mentioning. Let's take a look at that and see how that's going to work. So with .NET, you're going to get all that goodness that comes with .NET when you're using it with Blazor. Point-and-click debugging, you get support with the IDE, whether it's Visual Studio IDE or VS Code, and then you get both of that, whether it's on WASM or the server, which is great. And then on top of all of that stuff, you get IntelliSense, which is amazing. I don't know how I would live and develop apps today without IntelliSense. I mean, it's just amazing. Okay. So some limitations of debugging before we look into it is .NET Core 3.2 brings us a lot to the table that they previously, before GA, had some limitations. There's still two things you can't do, which is you can't break on unhandled exceptions, and you can't hit breakpoints on the app startup, right? They have said that they're actively working with a fix to both of those things by the next version, the next major release. So good things. Okay, so let's do a little demo here of debugging. So I'm going to pull up, stop this thing. And let's do a quick Razor component just to show what debugging looks like. So get rid of all that stuff there. Trusty little cheat sheet here. I'm going to say I'm going to pop in this code. And just in case you guys can't see this very well, I'm going to zoom in. So all I'm doing with this code is I'm creating a session object, right? Internally at the company that Ari and I work for, we have brown bag lunches. So with these lunch sessions, I'm going to create a list here. So our model of a session is basically, I just need a name and a date and put it into a list. And then when the page loads, I want to initialize that list with these two sessions, Blazor and whatever the next session is. And then the Blazor session's right now, and the next session is going to be in 1 day's time. And then so once I have that, I'm going to output it in a quick list, just some basic HTML. All right, so we just have a heading here, paragraph tag, and then I'm just going to loop through those sessions. And then let's just debug this just to see what it looks like before we start debugging. Okay, so boom, there you go. KT sessions. Here's a list of upcoming sessions with our two sessions and the date. So what if we want to actually like break on when it's looping, right? We want to make sure that date is correct. Well, just like you would with anything in .NET, you just add a breakpoint. It's pretty easy. Symbols have been loaded. Wait, let me see. Interesting. Demo gods are not coming favorably on me. Huh. Let's try this again here. Huh. All right. Well, not sure why that's not working. Debug. Fantastic. Okay, real quick, let me create a brand new project here. Go away. All right. Not sure why it's not loading. But anyways, create a new project. Blazor. Blazor Server this time. Shouldn't matter if you click server or WebAssembly, but let's try it with the server this time and just see what that looks like. I'm not sure why that not be working. It's so strange, but anyways. All right. Here we go. Cheat sheet here. All right, let's try this one more time. Let it load in here. Okay, there we go. So yeah, so just like you would expect on the server, then once we're hitting this breakpoint and we're in our sessions object, you have all of that available to you, right? So you can hover over, see all that data live, as well as go into anything in introspect. So you get all that great debugging. And like I said, with the Blazor WASM, you get all that too. Before Blazor 3.2, you actually didn't have the ability to do that. So that is new with the GA version, which is, it's incredible because you basically, if you think about it, what it's saying is you're allowed to debug the compiled code on the front end that's not even running on the server or anything. So it's pretty powerful. Here, continue on. So unit testing. We all should be unit testing our code at this point, right? And doing all the things with unit and system testing and integration testing and so forth. With Blazor, it's no different. You can test your code just like you would anything else in C# with any flavor you want. But BUnit is the main testing library you probably want to use for testing components in Blazor. It's really similar to like XUnit or NUnit or MS Test. Whatever your flavor is, BUnit's going to be pretty similar to that. And it's going to work with any of those test runners as well. So BUnit's like the NuGet package that you're going to import, and then you can use any test runner you want to actually run it. Now, I will say this. There is a limitation. You have to use XUnit if you want to run tests against your Razor syntax and not just directly against C# code. So that is one major caveat there. And again, if you want more information on this, then there is a really good .NET Rocks episode on Blazor testing with the creator of BUnit. It's 3 weeks old, I think. It's pretty recent. Yes, testing drawbacks, like I said. Razor syntax is only available with XUnits, and it is actually really complicated to set up. Like, it's not just create a new test project and go forth with it. You have to change things around, but with future versions of Blazor, that should be resolved, right? They should just make it like a one-click and done thing. So let's go look at that. I already have, since it is a complicated setup, I'm not going to go through what all that looks like because I don't want to bore you guys. But if you go to the BUnit website, there is a step-by-step guide, which makes it pretty straightforward. But here's what it looks like. We have our Blazor WASM.client project with a server client and shared. Then we have our pages. If we want to test the actual counter, right? Let's test that this counter is actually counting. So we want to test that there's an initial count of 0, and then whenever we click that button, we want to make sure it increments. So if you're familiar with testing in C# then it's probably going to look something like this. You have facts or test cases, and then you go through and do each test. And so we have 2 tests here. One of them is that counter should start at 0, and then we have a rendered component of counter, right? That counter classify F12 into that. Oops, that's not going to work, but it'll go into this, right? This is what that represents. And then so once this thing actually runs behind the scenes, basically what it's doing is it's using Selenium to run this thing and actually run the tests. And so we're going to make sure that it matches this markup current count equals 0. And it's going to do kind of the same test, but instead we're going to click on the button and then make sure it increases to 1, right? So if we run this whole thing, Test Explorer. All that's running there. These should come back as like, yes, it works. Okay, great. And then you also have the ability, like I said, with XUnit to do Razor tests. And since everything in Blazor is using Razor, you want to kind of make sure that the tests that you're writing in Razor, you should be able to, the components that you're writing in Razor, you should be able to test the Razor code itself, right? So this allows you to do that in a Razor type syntax. And so there's a special format, right? You have a snapshot test, whatever the input is. In this case, it's our counter component. And then an expected output, which is this. And you can see how this kind of can get unwieldy because you don't want to just duplicate the HTML every time. But there are ways to make that more efficient. And then basically allows you the power to do that. So, and this is just the way of writing Blazor tests. And so just like that, you would expect this to run and pass as well. And like I said, behind the scenes, it's running Selenium to actually do this stuff and load it up in a browser context. And so that's unit testing. All right. So kind of got a little taste of Blazor there. You see the two different types of flavors, server and WASM. I get to see what the debugging is, sort of. And then what unit testing looks like on it, right? Like, so you get that full featured, you can design a production level app for someone, yourself, a company, whatever it may be, and be confident that what you're going to release is actually going to work for real users. So what about the community behind it, right? Like, we have a problem. Can you actually get help on that problem? With this being so new, you want to make sure that it's not going to just go out of style in a year, right? Like, you want to make sure it's going to be around for the long haul. Make sure it's not the next Silverlight. That's what I keep hearing. And you know what? There is some truth to that. So the community, I'm glad to say that the community behind Blazor is already pretty big. You have a very, very active Stack Overflow community. There are many, many websites and forums dedicated to Blazor already. Extension support for Visual Studio, Blazor extensions with different plugins. You have component libraries that are already there, ones that you can pay for and ones that are free. Blazor, Blazorize, Matt Blazor. You have testing frameworks, which I just showed. There's a few others out there, but I would say BUnit is probably the best one. And then just like .NET Core, this thing revs fast. You're going to have a long-term support version, but they're going to be pushing out releases all the time. So just making sure you're keeping up with those things. And this page is, I hope the deck is available after this if people want it. But these are all kind of the good links if you're super interested in learning more about Blazor. There's tons of resources out there. There's tons of YouTube talks. .NET Rocks. You know, Carl Franken is huge. Is a huge Blazor advocate right now. So these are just some of the helpful links I've compiled for anyone who's interested. All of these are just a great place to start. And so with that, that's where I end. I hope you guys learned a little bit about Blazor, what it is, how to get started, and really to how to get on the next wave of the future for web development. Thank you.
Way to go, Nick. That was awesome. Oh, Mohammed's joining again.
Thanks.
He's joined 3 times. That was awesome. On the slides, just send them to me and I'll get those uploaded. I'll add them to the YouTube link for it. And that way, if anyone needs to download it, they'll be able to download it.
Okay.
Yeah. So I actually had some questions, and this would be a good time for others to ask questions as well. If you want, you can ask in the chat, or you could just unmute. The chat might be easier just because there's so many people. We've got 31 attendees, so just to make things easier. So my first question was, can you explain the compiles it to JavaScript, CSS, and HTML?
Yeah, so if you're talking about the server side part of it, basically it has a framework that it's using to compile the Blazor components down into JavaScript for you automatically. And then that's how it's going to render it in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So then, like, say you have a button on the front end in your component, for example, that counter component, right? It knows how to do that in web, and then when you click it, it knows how to send that event through SignalR to your backend and do some sort of logic. If there's any diff in the HTML, then it knows how to do that and then send it back to the browser to update the DOM. In WebAssembly, none of that SignalR stuff is there, right? So it just knows how to update on the HTML components all on the front end. Basically, it has all that logic that it's using with the .NET libraries, and it puts it all into WebAssembly for it to just do right there on the front end.
Oh, okay. So does it know, like, what things it might not want in the cloud? Like, a counter, for example, would it know, hey, that doesn't need to be in the cloud. I could keep it here and just do it locally, or is it just like it's all in the cloud if you go the server route, or it's all local?
Yeah, all the
Do
logic and the
WASM route?
type stuff, yeah, is gonna be in the server side, the API. Now with WebAssembly, no, all that's gonna live on the front end side because it's using all those libraries.
I accidentally muted you. Someone's kid was screaming, so I hit mute.
But yeah, so with WebAssembly, it's loading all those DLLs right into the browser, so it doesn't have to go back to the server. It has all that stuff available right there.
Is there a hybrid solution where you could go both ways and have the WASM locally, and then also do? Yeah, I'm just worried. Could you do both? It seems like that would be a natural thing, that the stuff that might require a server to do work and spread the load.
There's a couple flavors there. If you wanted to delay your decision, say like the business doesn't really know if they want backwards support or something, or say they just like the Signal R server route better, then yes, you can. If you just start that new project and do like, yes, I want a server route, and then there's a little thing you can do in the C# project to change the type if you want to go to the WASM route later on. But long term, if you just wanted to do like the hybrid, yes, of course, you can have the WebAssembly on the front end and then still have that API on the back end. Not necessarily with Signal R, right? Like you could do that if you wanted to, but you won't get that baked in support without some additional work.
But you could still send things over to the server anyway, so that makes sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. And if you have anything secure, you would want to do that as well.
Okay. So Matt has a question. With the WASM version, are there any CORS concerns? So if you're attempting to acquire data outside the domain hosting the WASM assembly, will CORS be an issue?
Yes. So there's different contexts, right? If this is a public, think of the PWA or your website as just a public facing website, then yes, you're going to have CORS concerns. If it's meant as like a line of business app or something like that, then yeah, you can basically say like, yes, I trust this front end website on this exact URL.
Okay, thanks. Okay, and then Brandon is asking, I'm trying to get it to show me the full. There we go. So when running the WASM project, allowing cache speeds up the first time to load. Is there a cache busting strategy to enable new releases of an app so the client doesn't cache the last release with all his bugs in it?
There is actually, and that is a really good question. Right now, I've only seen like an all or nothing. So like if there's certain DLLs that you've updated, I haven't found a really good way to just say like, hey, only update this project, right? It's like if it's updated, then just bust it all or not. And you can do that with, just simple query string manipulation.
Sure. Okay. Switching back to the chat. All right. And then Jeremy is asking, how difficult is it to integrate existing JavaScript libraries, for example, Google Maps with Blazor? Or are we limited to what has been ported to compatible C# libraries?
So JavaScript is optional, so you are allowed to go down into JavaScript and use that. I will say it is a bit more difficult to kind of like interrupt both of those things together. If you're going to use the Google Maps API on a Razor component, I would say just do everything in C# in the Razor component. So then, therefore, you would have to use like the Google Maps API for that the NuGet package right behind the scenes, and then from there, it should work as you would expect.
Okay. And to add to that, because I've been in more than one WASM or WebAssembly presentation, there is a bridge, but it's not always pretty, like Nick said. Okay. Are there any other questions? You could add them to the chat. I don't see anyone typing. There we go. Does the server side have full access to .NET assemblies or a subset?
It is anything that is in .NET Standard 2.2.
Is it
Yeah, I think
2.2?
Yeah, I thought it was. I'm pretty sure it's 2.2. I would have to double check though. I don't remember off the top of my head, but it is basically, let's just say 2.2, right? For sake of argument, but it's anything available within that namespace.
Okay, got it. And any NuGet package that's compatible with it, basically, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
So if there's a NuGet for it, you would have access to it as well. I did have an observation. One was, this just sounds like a great entry point for adding Xamarin, or having, if you have a Xamarin app, also adding this high performance web SPA to it, just because you already have all this code you could share. So I was just thinking that'd be really interesting. Mark's asking, are there Blazor tutorials available?
Yeah. There are tutorials, like step-by-step tutorials. As far as like a kata or like something you can do online, I'm not sure about that. But like Blazor Train by Carl Franklin, he has in-depth run-throughs for Blazor. So I would definitely check that out.
I'm checking to see. Oh yeah, there is one. I'm going to put a link here. Microsoft Learn is this awesome resource for those of you who don't know about it. And Microsoft has taken everything, like Microsoft Virtual Academy, Xamarin University, every other flavor of Microsoft training that's ever existed. And they've put it all together into a single platform, and that's Microsoft Learn. So the link that I just posted there, and by the way, I use Bing, Microsoft Learn Blazor. And if you spell it right, you get what I just sent you. If you don't spell it right, you get clothing. So, just
and make sure it's with an O, not an E.
Yeah.
But yeah, Isaac, I think Ari just answered your question there. I don't know if that's exactly a learning path, but it's pretty close to it, if not. Severa Cox asked, how will it handle doing simple things like setting focus on an input control, for instance, and then it's cut off. But basically, it's using XAML, right? So like if you want to do input focus or any of that, you just do your typical XAML controls. So like you can do on focus or on blur. Any of those things, and then it'll compile down and just handle that automatically for you. And then with that, you can actually set up eventing as well.
Yeah.
It's a good question.
And if you know Xamarin, you'll learn XAML. So, yeah, you can brush up on those fun skills. So, there we go. So for a PWA project, Michael asks, is the configuration for network first or offline centric settings done in app settings or startup CS, or a mix of the two?
That is a great question. I actually don't know. It basically just adds the manifest file in there so that you would see the manifest.json, and then I think you could set those settings in there, but I don't have an exact answer for you. I'm not 100% sure.
Sure. Great. Lots of great questions. Any other questions? Apparently Teams during a large chat doesn't say who's actually typing. Oh, Ajit S is waiting in the lobby. Okay, so we have a new addition, a new attendee. There we go. Teams is getting a little slower as I have all these different people. So like tapping anything takes a couple seconds, which is funny. For those of you who don't know, the Teams client is actually an Electron app. If you don't know what Electron is, that's Chrome in basically turning a website with all of its JavaScript and CSS and HTML into an application. Pretty powerful. That's what Visual Studio Code is. If you didn't know, that's what it is. Very cool. Okay, it doesn't look like we have any other questions right now. Great. Well, Nick, thank you so much. This was quite enlightening. It was really great. I spoke too soon. All right, Jeremy has another question. Is there anything special about how it handles the DOM behind the scenes? Does it use a virtual DOM like React or anything like that?
You know what? Someone asked this question in another session, and right now, when I looked it up, no, it does not use the virtual DOM. It just uses your standard. DOM JavaScript, basically like document.get, whatever. So no, but that could have changed. So yeah, I'm not 100% sure on that.
Yeah, I saw what React does. Just watching it, that was nuts. Great, awesome. Well, that was a great presentation. For everyone here, we'll make the recording available. So if you want to revisit anything that from Nick's presentation, it'll be available on YouTube probably by tomorrow. I'll add it to the .NET Consortium playlist. I'll also share it with the .NET Foundation, so they usually add that to their playlist. So there you go. You'll be famous, Nick. And Nick, if you could send me, send me the presentation, and also send me any of the links that are in the presentation, and I'll put all of those in the description so people can click through.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think that's all we got. So, hey, for everyone here, thanks for coming. I'll go through who wins the Ozcode subscription. And also, if you go to the Meetup site, you'll see the next few months of presentations that we've got lined up for you. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yay.
Thanks, Nick.
Ari, I already sent